Leaving the rainy season felt like the best plan we had all year. Sailing south, Captain decided to explore the Strait of Teoro, which goes behind the islands of Bhutan and Muna. Exploring a new strait is always exciting for the crew because you don't know what to expect, and there's an added bit of risk too because currents in these places can get extra strong. To get to the Strait of Teoro, we first had to go through the Strait of Wawoni and the northern section of the Strait of Bhutan. We were able to navigate Wawoni while it was still daytime, but by the time we entered the northern section of Bhutan, it got dark and all the lights of the other boats began to turn on. As we checked our AIS, we noticed that the Strait of Bhutan was filled with boats everywhere. Some were going up the strait, some down the strait, and some boats were going back and forth across the strait, ferrying people from island to island. As we headed down the channel, the captain noticed on the AIS that we had a boat near us we happened to know, named the Seahorse. The Seahorse is a large pinisi that is owned by a friend of ours and captained by his son. Their family was the reason we first came to Sulawesi in 2023, so of course we radioed in to say hi and learned that they were headed to the island of Komodo as they passed us on our starboard side. Even in this big old world, your friends can show up and say hi somewhere you've never been in the middle of the big old blue. Funny enough, about 30 minutes after that, our captain learned the name of another ship that he will never forget, the Raja Wali. Mir was motoring down the strait going 8 knots and about 3 hours from the Strait of Teoro when everything began to happen all at once. 2 faster boats began to approach Mir from behind, one from each side, creating a bit of a sandwich effect and making Mir the meat in the middle. At this time, there were also 2 other boats coming up the strait and heading right toward us. We all began to realize that we were about to enter the same space all together in about 5 minutes. So we began to talk to each other, formulating a plan for our approach on the radio. It was at this time that the Raja Wali came into play and decided to be the biggest prankster of the year. The Raja Wali is a ferry boat with a speed of about 12 knots an hour and a primary job to run from one side of the channel to the other, ferrying supplies. At the time all 5 of our boats were arriving in this congested area, the Raja Wali decided it was the perfect time to cut across the middle and see what we would do. This would be a pretty bold action even if it was during the day, but since it was at night, this kind of choice is really reckless. All at once, Channel 16 on the radio blew up with ship after ship yelling at the Raja Wali as he skirted through the quagmire like an uncatchable little rascal. When all 6 of our ships entered into this space, our captain couldn't believe what he was seeing and began yelling into the darkness towards the Raja Wali with all his might. Luckily, however, we all stood our ground and no collisions were had as our prankster motored away, laughing at us all. About 2 hours later, we were on the radio again as we learned that the power on the Seahorse had gone out completely and they were drifting along in the middle of the entrance to the Teoro Strait with no lights on. Now, we were about an hour away from them, so we had time to make a plan and slow down, but there were other boats much closer that were radioing in and trying to understand how to navigate around them. Luckily, 30 minutes later, they radioed back in saying they had fixed the problem, that their lights were back on, and for the first time, it was our turn to get into the Strait of Teoro. After a full night of navigating through the strait, we got through to the other side and were welcomed into the Flores Sea by a delightfully calm and sunny day. Finally, our dry season arrived. Or so we thought. That night, we were met by a huge storm with over 25 knots of wind and waves over 4 meters high. Having had a lot of experience with this type of weather through this year, we raised our sails and delightfully began flying through the sea at 10 knots. For the next 3 days, we didn't have to use our engine at all, and we were going so fast, in fact, that we arrived Moyo in 6 days, 3 days ahead of schedule.